This is Chuck Rowe from Midwest Studies Group. Thanks again for joining us yet for another edition of our video series. This week, we are joined by MSG team member Kelley Tetzlaff. Topic of the week, the future of fundraising. The world has never seen a shutdown like COVID before, and we are sort of finally getting out of it, Kelley. So what have you observed about how charities have done from the fundraising perspective?
Chuck, that's a great question. And, it's probably one of those that if you ask 10 people, you get 13 or 14 different answers. It's been a crazy world. That black swan event of that pandemic threw a monster monkey wrench into all the plans of every not-for-profit in 2020. From my experience in talking to various charities firsthand and from other stories from RD professionals, many, if not all, of the organizations had to do a major shift or pivot away from event-driven and event-driven focus to various iterations and alternatives such as online events, Zoom calls. They dropped events. They had to redo all of their planning. Those I found, at least in my experience, those that adopted actually did very well from a fundraising perspective in many cases. One very unexpected serendipity that came out of the pandemic and all the panic and confusion was that I have heard from many organizations that they actually had their highest net ever from many of their events. That's obviously was a big part of that was because their gross overhead was smaller, having to do everything online rather than rent a big hotel room or whatever. Their net was actually the highest ever achieved by many of those organizations. So it's kind of an interesting side benefit that nobody would have expected. Also, while I know that early on, almost everyone was fearful in the early stages of the pandemic that giving was going to dry up and go away and be significantly reduced. Interestingly enough, giving as a whole actually increased across the board. If you look at Giving USA for 2020, giving was actually up overall 5.1% to $471.44 billion. That's an amazing outcome. Also, individual giving still made up the largest part of that $471 billion. 69% of that pie of the 471 was from individual giving. I will say again, I've said this multiple times, my observation is that those organizations that pivoted or shifted to more of an individual model, more of an individual focus, a stronger focus on connections, did pretty well. Those that didn't do possibly quite as well, but individual giving remained very high. In fact, giving across the board, except in the areas of health and hospitals and arts, was increased.
With all that happened during 2020, what do you see that organizations need to plan for, AKA, will life and fundraising go back to normal?
Chuck, first, I don't believe that the world of fundraising will ever get back to normal, whatever normal was defined as, whatever that looked like, not in the foreseeable future anyway. I really think that with the coronavirus stuff, pandemic, fear, uncertainty is not done. All the craziness that goes with that. Not to get political, but the virus doesn't appear to be eradicated. It doesn't appear that the fear factor or the concern factor of people has gone away. I think they will not go away easily. Now, the concern is that I heard one discussion yesterday on another webinar that according to the numbers first 6 months of 2021, it appears that we're on track to go back to 2019 levels. A great fear or hesitation that I have is that charities after the crazy 2020 pandemic and Black Swan event is that as this is getting over, everybody is taking a breath and saying, I'm glad that is done. And so they're sitting back a little bit. Plus, with the success or the increase of giving, everybody's thinking, oh, we're okay. But the worry, as I mentioned earlier, is that it would appear, at least preliminary numbers, that giving is dropping a little bit, and that giving may not be as much or as high as it was because of the pandemic. Also, another fact that I don't think I haven't heard anybody talk about it, but if you remember back in, I think it was the end of 2019, the Chronicle of Philanthropy published an article that was talking about, they did a survey of resource development professionals across the country. And there was some crazy number, and I could be off in this, it's been a while since I've read that, but like 60 to 70% of RD professionals were planning on leaving the profession, not just going to a new job, but leaving the profession. And that was before the craziness of 2020. My concern is that with the craziness of 2020 and all the pressure and stress and everything that, every RD professional out there experienced, I wonder how much of that prediction from the article is going to become true. And we're going to see a mass exodus and a changeover in resource development positions. That's going to provide another source of uncertainty and another source of volatility that I don't know that anybody's planning for or thinking about.
So with that being said, the uncertainty of the pandemic, the seemingly uncertain future of investment markets, and the discussion of tax law changes, what should a charity do to plan for fundraising going forward with these items?
I am convinced that we're going to continue to see social and economic unrest and volatility. We're going through a time in this country where it's socially, certainly there's a lot of questions out there, a lot of change going on, and economically, who knows what's going to happen. It's going to be interesting. I can't tell you when, how, what, but I think we're going to see the stock market change. We're going to see economically things change, and that is another unknown that's out there for charities. And what in heaven's name are you going to do when there's another black swan event that comes along? And lastly, newsflash, unless you've been living under a rock, I'm sure everybody knows we have a different political climate. And it's highly likely that taxes are going to look different going forward than they did in the past. In other words, taxes are going to go up. There are all sorts of factors. And if you look at the current administration, the proposals that are being thrown around at Congress now could significantly increase both income taxes, capital gains taxes, and estate taxes. Again, all of those factors are going to change how fundraising is done, in my opinion, going forward. And if charities don't start thinking about that, they may get hit or blindsided by another black swan kind of event.
So what closing remarks do you have for those fundraisers out there?
I don't want, so far all I've been talking about is doom and gloom and the world is going to blow up. I'm really not a negative guy. I'm really an optimist, and I believe the future is going to be good. But I like to call myself, Chuck, a realistic optimist. I want to work hard for the best. I do believe the future has amazing and tremendous opportunities for not-for-profit organizations. But I also think we have to be aware and think about and ready to work through some of the monkey wrenches and dips that are going to happen. I do believe, for example, that assuming some of the tax changes that have been proposed, and there's like 7 or 8, and different proposals by President Biden, by Senator Sanders, by several others, that it's going to change the look of our social and economic landscape. However, I also think that those changes are going to make what could be the best opportunity for charities to raise money. The fact of the matter is, those changes that are going to be made will open the door for philanthropy in ways we've never had an opportunity before. With those changes, honestly, philanthropy is just about the last tax deduction or tax tool that can be used to reduce people's taxes. So I think charities, if they start planning for, excuse me, start planning for things like IRA distributions, IRA rollovers, IRA charitable distributions, the recent tax laws throughout what's called the stretch IRA, which many people used for very large IRAs to stretch them out over a long period of time. A fantastic tool to help people with minimizing the taxes for their heirs is called a charitable remainder trust IRA. And so I really believe that there is a great opportunity in the future for major gifts and for planned gifts and for alternative gifts of assets versus cash or cash only, that charities, if they start planning for it and building their programs, it's going to be could be the best opportunity we have seen in our lifetimes for philanthropy.
And for those of you watching, Kelley has been on the national and regional staff for groups like Boys and Girls Club of America, Arthritis Foundation, American Red Cross, and a lot of great other groups as well. And so when it comes to major gifts and planned giving, this man knows what he's talking about. But for more information, make sure you come to MidwestStudiesGroup.com. And also, thank you so much for joining us today, Kelley. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on here, Chuck. I appreciate it.
To everyone else, thanks for watching again. Chuck Rowe, Midwest Studies Group. Catch you next time.